So very quickly, I just want to do a quick introduction to HOT first, before we move on to the main part of the response and what we did with crowdsourced damage assessments. I'll share a lot of data and learnings with all of you, and at the end of the day, we can have Q&A session. So Humanitarian Overseas Campaign, or HOT for short, is an international organization that's been around since the 80s breaks in 2010. We work primarily with communities to not only develop open geospatial data, but also to leverage open geospatial data for humanitarian development and initiatives. So HOT has 4 different regional offices around the world, one in Latin America, 2 in Africa, and the office I'm from covers the Asia Pacific region. And we work primarily with OpenStreetMap, which is this open source version of Google Maps. It's really open and available, meaning anyone and everyone can edit, update, contribute, and more importantly, download the data, the geospatial data from their users. We have several tools at our disposal. I'm going to share this tool. One is our HOT Tasking Manager that allows us to work with our communities, conduct remote mapping. So this allows anyone with a browser to be able to add and update OpenStreetMap from anywhere in the world. We also work a lot with OpenStreetMap communities. So this is a network of local mappers, including in Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So we have quite extensive networks of trained local community members who are familiar with mapping across the region and globally. I just want to quickly share some of the projects to give you an idea of how open geospatial data can be used for different kind of initiatives. In the Philippines and in Jamaica, we work with the city government, we work with the Pacific Disaster Center, we work with communities to map their cities, to identify where the infrastructure are, where the buildings are, and eventually this data fed into early warning system and anticipatory action plan. We also work with private sector, so in this case, social enterprise in Bangalore, wanted to identify where the different water bodies are in the city itself. And what we did was set up a quickly map of all the different areas where we were local community members. The reason why I'm sharing this with you is that even though this benefited the social enterprise, the data which is open can go on to support a lot of other stakeholders in the region itself, including those pushing for conservation. Okay, so now I've done the introduction, so let's dive into the exciting part of my presentation. What is crowdsourced damage assessment? Crowdsourced damage assessments is effectively working with a team of volunteer, in this case mappers, to conduct damage assessments for the different disaster responses around the world. And it's been around for a very long time, as early as in 2003, when 2 experienced integrators injuries in the Iran earthquake to identify signs of damage. So there's a lot of work and paper that's gone through over the years, and one of the most significant paper that we were working with was from Sadiq Blue's platform. This gave us 2 very important framework to understand what the past methodology is like, how can we learn from it, what are the recommendations that we can take to develop our own crowdsourced damage assessment methodologies. So as you can see, there's a chunk of words on the screen itself. There were a lot of different papers, a lot of different findings. And what we did was to streamline all of this to different recommendations that we can take for crowdsourced damage assessment, or CDA for short. So there were 2 things. One is to understand the logistics of working with volunteers and members, and what were the tools that we can use for the CDA, crowdsourced damage assessment. And the second is the actual CDA methodology itself. So with member management, we were looking at how we can create comprehensive training and training materials so that different communities around the region can participate directly in crowdsourced damage assessments. And more importantly, we need to be able to accommodate volunteers more with other expertise. Second is an open source platform. What is this platform that can accommodate different volunteers from different parts of the region with different challenges to make internet connectivity and perhaps lack of laptops right now. Not really be able to be part of the disaster response and recovery efforts. Another one is that part of our ongoing work with computer and rely on up-to-date volunteer base that can mobilize at any point of time for disaster response, for climate action, for other types of humanitarian activities. So then we look at the methodology. There are a few takeaways that different authors, different researchers have told us. One is the need for very time research imagery to ensure that we are able to accurately identify images. The second is that damage assessment methodology should be again to accommodate members at different expertise. We're not only talking about GMs or scientists, we're also talking about local community members who are local experts and know their context the best. And last of all, to be able to use a multi-methods approach to be able to find different ways to ensure that the data comes out accurate and reliable for human response. And we know that at this point there are different types of granularity of damage assessment data that can be used at different stages in disaster response and recovery. Times over, this actually review is going to be a bit boring, so I just want to jump into what we did for Myanmar earthquake response, starting early March, late March 2025. But I think since the reverse March we have been activated alongside Myanmar Focus Impact Community, or my for short, CD and our global and local group of volunteers to be able to validate links and enroll networks in earthquake affected townships from our task manager. And all the data is always open available to everyone. You can find it on the script app or even HDX. And I'm proud to share that since March to October, we were able to work with more than 3,400 volunteers, met 1.7 billion unique footprints, more than 20 kilometers of roads in all the different affected townships itself. And we have seen a lot of downloads of this data for different purposes, including identifying safe routes for travel when to deliver aid. And in the wake of the earthquake, we found that a lot of townships were very poorly back. And the existing data was severely outdated, and there were up to 5% data gaps. And why I'm telling you this is because at the start of the disaster response, a lot of humanitarian actors had to rely either on outdated data or any current generated data sets in their response plan. And I'll tell you a little more about why it's actually quite problematic for risky data. And one of the first learning, so there are quite a few session takeaways, slides like this, that we want you to take away from this section itself. And the first is that without pre-disaster capacities, without actual training, resilience preparation, etc., you'll find yourself unprepared when disasters actually strike. So a lot of members that we work with have to do that from scratch. And a lack of experience mapping in Myanmar also meant they needed more time, validation, and grid mapping. I'll tell you why we had some challenges with Myanmar. So given the context itself, it was very hard for us to start exploring mapping projects prior to the disaster itself. And with the disaster, when we went there, we had to work darkly and hard to ensure that our members are well trained and well prepared to ensure to prepare quality data for humanitarian responses to the And for May October itself, funded by Fixed Network and UKFCO, we are able to scale up our activation to improve much needed open geospatial data to more affected townships across the region itself. There were four main things that we wanted to achieve. We wanted to improve foundational digital footprints and local networks data in all the different affected townships. We wanted to pilot the crowdsourced damage assessment. What does it mean on that damage assessments with local Myanmar members? And last of all, we wanted to compare all the data that's been produced so far to showcase what are some of the limitations and advantages of different open source data sets. And last of all, we wanted to continue to build capacities for our local Myanmar members on what local mapping means, what are the different tools. I want to do a quick sharing session and showcasing of the Myanmar Focus Community, or IMSM. They are very critical network of efforts that were huge contributors to our mapping efforts during the itself. And through this, we identified 15 representative IMSM members. We trained on local mapping tools and skills so that when they graduate out of the project itself, they can continue to support future mapping needs in the region. CPA itself is quite extensive. We tried our best to conduct a handling process where we started with crafting foundational data and using the same data to conduct the niche assessment. And then we marked up the data through focus report or HDX itself. And along the way, we continue to focus on open source tools, including website, podcast manager, and back to that. So this can be accessed anywhere on your browser, on your mobile group, as long as you have internet connection, and you can start contributing to identifying, evaluating, mapping building footprints and networks, and damage buildings. So we're quite excited about the CA methodology because we were able, through the support of the volunteers, to reach more than 29 townships in over 7 months. And this, compared to other commercial options, it's much more cost-effective and at the same time much more accurate because we are tapping onto local knowledge. At the same time, we were able to conduct damage assessments for 80 different townships because of the accessible tools and trainings that we introduced to allow more volunteers to be able to contribute. And in the future, I think one of the things that we found out is that extensive community building, continued community building across the region is very critical. Our training Myanmar members in 2024 were very critical connectors with local members in the 2025 virtual response. They helped us enable better coordination, even after translation, or even just guidance of the younger trained members on what things to pick up or what mistakes to avoid. When it comes to again, this is just foundational building footprints data, we assess AI models to still be imprecise. And they can risk misperforming during the reaction. So when we compare our data, manually back to validated to Microsoft's AI generated data sets, there were challenges with the number of buildings that were produced. There were challenges with shape accuracy. There were also challenges with the false positives and false negatives of the building footprints that were produced through the back to ours. What that means is that if they were building on actual building reality, Microsoft didn't have it. If there was no building reality, Microsoft had it. So at the end of the day, having our local Myanmar members with local knowledge did help contribute to higher accuracy when we produce the data itself. And let's talk about the count itself. How extensively different our manually mapped validated count is compared to what they generated. So 57% difference back to between what's at the Microsoft data. So that means that up to 50% of buildings, potentially households, were potentially missing from humanitarian responses when they were using it early on in the disaster response itself. And this was very consistent with what we thought we were going to when we compare our map and validated data against what the AI-generated data sets have produced in the long itself. So at the end of the day, I want to stress that with AI models itself, I'm not going to shoot it down and say that it shouldn't exist. AI can be extremely rapid, especially in the early hours of disaster response. What they can do in 3 hours in 500,000 volunteers in the week itself. However, as we continue to update the data through manual mapping and validation, it's important that you place the data because it's more accurate and it ensures that we capture all of the different populations that are affected. So for us, it's important to consider respect to this comparison so that different humanitarian actors are able to quantify the limitation and advantages of different methodologies and be more involved in using that at different parts of the disaster response. Okay, so that's foundational with the footprints and local data. Now let's move to damage assessment, which I believe most of you are excited. So I think we have identified more than 2,169 damage claims across 20 townships with Myanmar members. And if you look at the chart itself, you want to point out that being able to work with local Myanmar members, being able to outsource participation to non-volunteer members, allow us to reach more townships than what Microsoft only means could achieve. And this is because one, obviously, it's cost effective to work with local Myanmar members, but at the same time, we saw a lot of enthusiasm and compassion for local Myanmar members be able to want to participate in supporting their country's disaster response. And at the end of the day, we found that the CPA can overcome the bottleneck faced by other methodologies, especially when it can also be validated by local knowledge. This might probably wise, there's much more things more below, especially during on current funding time. Okay, now let's talk a little more about the limitations and advantages of CPA and other damage assessment methodologies. And to do so, we conducted a series of validation or sortation workshops. And what we did at the beginning, some of you, but not all, was that we got some of the participants to compare pre- and post-disaster imagery and tell us whether or not this is damage or not damage. And these were released chosen at random from all three methodologies, from CPA, from UNOSAT, Microsoft. And effectively, what they're doing is validating or invalidating some of these assessments. Afterwards, we got them to share a little more feedback on how they think about it, how did they approach the assessment, what were the signs they were looking out for that led to the environmental emission here. The first thing that I found is that when it comes to image resolution, that is one of the highest indicator of how we can improve the accuracy of damage assessment methodologies. If you look at MaxUp and then of the same area, MaxUp is slightly much more higher resolution, whereas there are three different issues. It's low resolution, it has coarse textures, and at the same time it's discolored. Three of which made it extremely difficult for Myanmar members or other members to conduct damage assessments. And you will find that on the chart itself, with MaxUp, there are much more greener portions which is validated compared to which is not propagated portions, which is invalidation of all the different damage data from UNOSAT, CPA, and Microsoft. And then we went a step further and looked at the different regions in South and Inguan, and we realized that most of the it's more accurate damage assessment methodologies, all three, are much more accurate in Southern and Mandalay. And as compared to the Mikko and concrete, and we found this because two reasons. Sagaing and Mandalay, the left two columns are covered by MaxUp, which is higher resolution, and Sagaing and Mandalay is closer to the epicenter, which potentially saw much more observable higher levels of damage compared to two, which is quite far further. Okay, so what this means? This means that the strongest indicator of the damage assessment accuracy is to image resolution, imagery resolution, and scale of observable damage. What this means is, it is a bit obvious, but at least we can go ahead and count commercial companies, we can go ahead and count space agencies that we need high, very, very high resolution imagery if you would want us to continue to as accurately assess damages across the region itself. And going forward, we also take all the different assessment methodologies, limitation and advantages. Then we went a step further. Now we want to compare the three methodologies. We want to compare what we did, OSM, Microsoft and UNOSAT's output. And you'll find that OSM is slightly much more accurate compared to Microsoft and UNOSAT. We took it a step further, and we wanted to then understand how the three different methodologies compare when we look at the same townships that we're covering. And you can then see, once we restrict ourselves to the common townships, again, because we cover much more, in the three townships itself, OSM, which is under us, are significantly much more accurate because we see lesser evaluation, lesser rate areas compared to Microsoft, which is significantly higher than all three, and compared to UNOSAT. And I want to point out that one of the things that I realized is that we felt that it's much more accurate because our members have local knowledge. They will be able to understand why this building is out damaged or why this building looks like it's damaged, but it's actually not damaged. And there were quite a few different reasons why that we tried to better understand. As I mentioned, different imagery issues, including coarse textures, discoloration, and poor resolution, it makes it extremely difficult to identify signs of damages. And another issue we face is that when it comes to pre and post disaster imageries, the time gap could lead to major urban changes or structural changes, and some of this is leading to say, for you aside, when they see the changes and assume that this damages from the earthquake itself. Okay, that's it. Yeah. So another thing that found helpful was that the validated baseline foundational building footprints data, the outlines itself, was able to help some of our members identify that, hey, actually there's a building here of this shape and size. And look at post-disaster imagery and tell us, is this damage? Does this look like it's damage? And on the second imagery that itself, I can see actually wrong. But I do know that the building looks like this in the past. Then at this point, it's clear that those are green. Then I can go ahead and safely say that this is damaged. And now, going back to all of these different challenges, how did our Myanmar members succeed in more accurately identifying damages? Local knowledge. They were able to tap on the local knowledge to better identify changes. They were able to better understand what structural developments are, what damages are. And preliminary, I can say that the local knowledge is extremely helpful in validating outputs from different methodologies. Okay, I just want to quickly go through this. As I mentioned, we wanted to understand what were the local Myanmar members' thought processes in reviewing and identifying the signs of damages. We took all the different feedback from them, identified keywords, and from there, identified 5 different categorizations of damages. Architecture is very important, changes, location and